So for the demo today, I wanted to take a look at something that we tried out last week with bridge builders, or it's a few weeks back already, right? And I couldn't get it to work because my brain wasn't computing at that time. It sometimes happens, right? You're under pressure, but I was very, very tired. I had my first week at my new job and a lot of things has happened. So I couldn't get my brain to function properly to get the CSS in there. That's something I want to reconcile today. So I couldn't create this section right here. I had an idea, but I couldn't get it to work. This had to do with my tiredness, so sometimes it is what it is. So here we have the thingy that we wanted to recreate. So what I see here, let's deconstruct first, right? To make it a little bit easier to understand what's actually happening on this section. So what we see here is that we have a grid of 6 items. And inside the grid, we have another grid actually. It's an invisible grid. Now, how people nowadays do it is that they create a Flexbox for this one and a Flexbox for this one, and then put the contents in there. Let's say that we don't need an extra Flexbox, and then you need to put an extra container around that one as well. But we don't need all of that. And besides, our order of our content wouldn't work, because this would be the first section and this would be the second section. Now, if you're a little bit smart, you know that you can change how it starts and then use order to get it in front of one or another. But I would reckon that it can be done easier. And the way I would approach this actually is making a grid of something like this. And this is just one container. So a container of grid that is split like this. Now what we want to do is have four grids. So one for this one, 2 rows and 2 columns. That's what we are going to do. So let's just get to it, right? We'll open up bricks. All right, we'll put in a section. There we have our section. Inside our section, we want this to be a grid. So we go inside of our display, set it to grid. And for our grid, perhaps we want to have it as a repeat grid 3. Now, I'm not used to using ACSS. There we have our 3 grid structure. And then inside of our container, we want to add another div. And inside of our div, we want to set our display to grid as well. And then for our columns, we want our, remember this image? We want 2 columns. So 1FR, 1FR. And we want 2 rows, 1FR. Now, to make it a little bit more visible, let's add in all the things that we need. So to make the order sense, we start out with a heading, then we add a little bit of text, and then we add our icon, because the icon is the accent, and the most important thing in this section is actually our heading and our text, right? So let's add those in. And there we go. There we have our structure. But as you can see, it doesn't look like anything that we actually wanted, right? So we need to change things up. We need to change this grid position. And how we do that is that we can't do that actually in our content. With GreenShift, it's the same thing. I don't know why. It's only possible on containers, but it should be possible also to change the position on any element that's inside of a grid. Luckily, there's always a way to circumvent certain things, so we can add in our own CSS. So we open up the root and we position this in our grid and then row. And because we want our icon to be on the first row, we set it to 1/1. This means the first column of the first row. And it doesn't go, it means the first column of the row and will end in the first column of the row. Now, how you should count this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. So actually it will end on 2. And as you can see, it's still doing good. Now you see that our text is getting beneath the icon and we don't want that. So how we can fix that is going in here, go to grids column and also say that we want 1/2, but then it will end here because we have 1 row, 2 columns, and then 3 columns. So we want to end it on the last column. So we set it to 3. Now, as I guess I meant rows, so we need to change those up, but it's really quickly easy to do so. And there we go. Now these are underneath each other and the icon is nicely aligned in this section, right? It is now spanning 2 columns because this icon can be bigger than our heading. But I see that there's a lot of space used by the content itself, right? There's a lot of white space there that doesn't need to be there. So what we can do is go out to our div, then in our content, we have set one fraction, which means that every column takes up the amount of space of one fraction of the amount of space. So usually it's half. What we can do instead of one fraction is use something like min content. And if you min content, we immediately see that this spacing is a little bit tinier. And if we do that for the second one as well, we see that the spacing is even more tinier. Because the icon can span 2 rows, the height of that row is determined by the largest element that needs to be in that section. And in this place, it is our heading. In the second section, it is our text. So this is how the grid builder can work. And as you can see, it's much more efficient because we don't need extra containers. And also our structure looks like how it should look, right? It should look like this. It should look like having a heading, a paragraph, and an icon in the structure. But visually, we want to change the order of items, so we change it in our grid. And that's where I always have difficulties with using external tools because we can't set these kinds of settings. They can only be set on containers, and I don't understand why, because it should be available everywhere. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of spacing still going on. And if we look at the example right here, there's not that much of spacing and they can be very easily fixed. Because I'm using ACSS, I imagine that there's already a default gap being used. We can set it to 0. And as you can see, it's now very tight. And we can also see gap. What kind of gap can we use? It's a shame that we can't see any values because that would make our lives a little bit easier. Because unlike Gavin Geary, I don't remember them by heart. We can also use some. Why am I doing like this? We can use spacing, right click options. There we go. We have space and now it's a bit tighter. So this is what I actually wanted to do during our bricks building challenge, but as I stated this earlier, my brain didn't compute. It's much more clean, but it does need a little bit of custom CSS because it doesn't have that by default in any builder actually. I hope this section helps a little bit out with understanding how you can do and build structures a little bit more efficient. It requires you to have less containers, which makes the DOM smaller, which is usually an issue with the core web vitals, and especially when you're using Elementor. You can position everything in a grid, which makes it very flexible. And I want to test out something at the next live stream, which is called components. It's a new function that we can use, and I think that will be very useful using together with grid, that you can position all kinds of things in a different way depending on the amount of space available. So if you don't want to miss that, then join me on the next live stream or watch this video.